Welcome everyone, and good afternoon to all of you. Good morning and good evening to our colleagues who are not in the afternoon. Today for me is another important day to have a conversation around clean air. And as we are all aware and familiar with this subject has been topical for most important international organizations in recent times, especially for the WHO. And today we are going to discuss the state of global air quality funding for 2021, unlocking a clean air dividend. We are aware of the emphasis that have been made by the guidelines of the WHO on the need to have clean air and to support funding clean air across board for countries. We are lucky today to have experts from different institutions who would be looking at the subject from different perspectives. And I have the opportunity on that note to first and foremost take participants through the program outline for this afternoon's discussions, after which I would also introduce my panelists who will be speaking to us this afternoon. This afternoon, we are going to have a presentation on the state of clean air funding for 2021. And we are going to also have the opportunity to have discussants who will be speaking on the subject and looking at it from different perspectives. We would be looking at it from a philanthropic perspective, we'll be looking at it from a multilateral perspective, and we'll also be looking at it from a development perspective. On that note, I have the opportunity to introduce to you three important panelists. And the first is Janine Krieger, who's the head of division of the Global Program Climate Change and Environment at the Swiss Agency for Development and Cooperation. And she will be speaking on the role of an agency or institution on how they are tackling air pollution issues in that institution. We also have in our midst Liz McQueen, who is head of Climate Action Portfolio at the IKEA Foundation, and she will be focusing more on a philanthropic perspective of today's discussions. We are also fortunate to have an expert from the World Bank, the person of Yewande Awe, who's a senior environmental engineer at the World Bank, and he will be looking at it from a development bank perspective. I will now use the opportunity to invite Sean, who will present the report, after which we will listen to remarks from our panelists, and then we will open up for a Q&A session. And I want to inform all participants this afternoon that there will be a LinkedIn event live stream comment section. And I entreat all of you to put your comments in there. And at appropriate time, we would get our discussants to respond to the questions that we will gather from the LinkedIn. When we are done with the Q&A section, we would have opportunity to have closing remarks, and that will bring us to the end of today's discussions. We are going to spend approximately about an hour, and the presentation is going to take 10 minutes. Each of my discussants will have 5 minutes to make remarks, and so in total we'll have 50 minutes. And then we will have quite some time for the Q&A session. On that note, I would want to first and foremost share with you from the Ghanaian perspective what we have been doing in the area of clean air. Ghana has been very lucky to benefit from support from different institutions, including the WHO, the CCAC, and also the US EPA in the area of clean air. We have managed to incorporate short-lived climate pollutants in our current updated national determined contribution, which will be submitted to the UNFCCC by close of month, by close of this September. In addition, Ghana has been very active in the Brief Life campaign, and we have also managed to establish an innovative data center to provide the necessary scientific evidence to support policy development in the area of clean air. We have also established a national coordinating steering committee made up of different sectors to deal with important issues relating to clean air, and also to coordinate the different policies from the different institutions. Ghana believes that clean air can bring about a number of multiple benefits, aside the fact that it will also contribute to other climate change objectives. It is with this background that government of Ghana would continue to support any cause that will create the opportunity to create funding to deal with issues relating to clean air. And I believe most of the participants who are engaged in the discussions today share this particular view with Ghana. On that note, I will want us to move straight into the discussions, and I'll invite Sean to start with the presentation on the report. Sean, over to you.
Thank you, Peter. Thank you very much for the introduction. I will share my screen now, and we will move straight into the presentation. Great. So I'm going to talk a bit about the main findings of the Clean Air Fund State of Global Air Quality Funding Report. I'll give some context on the funding landscape and why it's important to fund work to improve outdoor air quality, and then run through some of our key insights into both development and philanthropic funding. And then I'll talk a little bit about some of our key recommendations. But to start with, what is the clean air dividend that we mentioned in the title of this event? Well, by that we mean the multiple benefits that are realized through effective action on air quality, because it does have deeply positive effects on health, with immediate improvements in well-being, climate, because the sources of pollution and greenhouse gases are often the same, for children who are particularly vulnerable, and for inequality as air pollution hits the poorest hardest, and for economic development, since air pollution imposes a huge productivity cost. And generally, it helps to achieve a sustainable future. And on sustainability, I wanted to quickly flag the link between action on air quality and the SDGs, because air quality funding can help work towards all 8 of the SDGs that you see on this slide. In particular, the goals on good health and well-being, on affordable and clean energy, and sustainable cities and communities have specific targets and indicators that are directed at improving air quality. So all of these answers to the question, why work on air quality, act to form this clean air dividend. So what is the funding landscape through which governmental and non-governmental organizations can realize this clean air dividend? I mean, of course, in countries, domestic government spending is the largest source of air quality funding, but particularly where states don't have the means or the capacity, or where civil society pressure for action is needed, then funding from other sources can make all the difference. So our report focuses on 2 main funding types that play a key role. Official development funding, which captures both development assistance and other official flows, and that's the grants and loans from development agencies and multilateral organizations to aid recipient countries. Now, with air quality key to those SDGs that I mentioned, you would expect air quality to be a priority issue for such agencies and institutions. But generally speaking, with a few notable exceptions, these funders are not that geared up to work on this, because ownership of this issue, air quality, is spread across lots of different teams, and that dilutes focus and limits impact. And the second area we're talking about is funding from philanthropic foundations who fund air quality projects, both domestically and internationally. And this is a significant area and increasingly important, but as we'll find out, it's still actually the case that there's very few foundations working on this. So what is the situation? What are our main insights? As you can see from here, looking at the blue line versus the red line, mortality due to outdoor air pollution has been diverging sharply. Since 1990, there has been a 153% increase in deaths in aid recipient countries, and over the same period, a 30% reduction in other countries. And aid recipient countries now make up 90% of global air quality deaths. That tells us a couple of things. One is that where there has been action on air pollution, funding and political will, improvements can be made. And that's, broadly speaking, has taken place in the developed world. And it also shows us that there is a real case for development funders to play a pivotal role in funding projects to help close the gap between the developed world and the less developed world. One of the other key findings that we wanted to highlight was when the analysis that we did really produced a shocking finding. When we reviewed development funding that was going on clean air projects and development funding that was going on fossil fuel prolonging projects, we discovered that there's 21, still at this moment, 21% more money being spent on fossil fuel prolonging projects than on clean air projects. It's a pretty shocking statistic and a shocking discovery. And we've been using that statistic at the Clean Air Fund to really, ramp up calls along with other people for an immediate halt to financing of fossil fuels, with the recommendation that this financing be shifted to the clean air agenda. Okay, let's look at the numbers. What is the situation with the funding that is working towards clean air? And the headline here is that unfortunately the totals still consistently make up less than 1% of total ODF. There's a large amount of money, 5.5 billion, that's been spent over the data period of the last 5-6 years. And promisingly, a bit more of this has been spent in the last 3 years. Although in 2020, we are seeing a bit of a dip, which is a little bit worrying. But the bulk of this money is in the form of loans and not grants. Just 11% of all funding is in the form of grants, and the rest is in loans, predominantly loans to middle-income countries. And when we look at the main recipients, you can see this in action. You can see funding is concentrated in a small number of large middle-income countries. 88% goes to the top 10, 45% of disbursements went to China alone. The good news is that this large amount of money going to China has actually made a difference. There has been a significant decrease in the death rate there. So that shows that investment and political will can really make a difference to air quality. So now lessons need to be learned and solutions need to be shared, and more funding needs to flow to a more globally representative set of countries, particularly low-income countries in Africa. Moving along, this chart basically shows us that there are big funders, Asian Development Bank and the World Bank, giving hundreds of millions of dollars of loans. But in terms of grants, the grants are quite small. Sweden is the largest grant funder, spending $21 million. And when you look at how much money is actually going in grants versus loans, you see that bilateral assistance is only 0.2% of all development agency funding. So it's a very small amount overall. Now let's move to philanthropic foundation funding, and let's look at the trends here. And you see there has been a linear increase in funding from a very low base in 2015 up to $44.7 million of primary funding in 2020. However, just to put this in context, this is an even smaller drop in the ocean in context of total funding. Less than 0.1% of all philanthropic funding globally is currently spent towards air quality. And at this rate of increase, it will take another 8 years to exceed 100 million per annum. One area we looked at depth was the focus area of foundations that are funding air quality projects. And philanthropic funding is dominated by foundations that are working on climate, energy, and environment. And a key area that is underrepresented is health foundations. In health foundations that don't work on anything else but health only spent $1.2 million on air quality in 2020, a tiny amount. And this is despite ambient air quality being a global health emergency with 4.2 million premature deaths annually, which is more than tuberculosis, malaria, and HIV/AIDS combined. And again, we see the same geographic skew with foundation funding as with overseas development funding. The money is concentrated in particular geographic areas, and Africa, Latin America, and Asia, apart from India and China, tend to miss out. So the annual mortality in Africa, Latin America, and Asia, excluding China and Asia, is 1.37 million. But the graph here shows that combined they receive just 3.4% of total foundation funding. Now moving on to recommendations to finish us off. Well, obviously, the key point is the 1% and 0.1% statistics of total funding. The comparison to other funding sectors and the dividends of clean air clearly indicate that one, more funding is needed to match the scale of the problem, and two, that air quality needs to be seen as more of an explicit priority in missions, programs, and reporting of funders. And the second really follow-up point from that is the distinct lack of funding in low-income countries, particularly in Africa, where there is rapid urbanization and the potential for early intervention, indicates that we need both more grant making and we need it to be sent to a globally representative set of countries. And that shocking statistic, we need to work on that shocking statistic of money going to the fossil fuel investments. 21% is the number that I quoted earlier on. We really need to stop all investment in new fossil fuel activities, especially as renewable energy is now a cost-effective and efficient replacement for fossil fuel power. And finally, we need to move away from the dominance in the foundation space of climate, energy, and environment philanthropies and bring in the health foundations and the foundations with other interests. In particular, the air quality sector would really benefit from the expertise of areas such as health, which have the potential to really provide a step change in total funding towards this issue. Thanks very much for listening. I hope that gives you a good overview of the situation from the report, and I'll pass you back to Peter now, and I'll stop sharing.
Thank you very much, Sean, for that insightful presentation. Very good summary indeed, but quite fascinating that clean air or air pollution is creating more deaths than even tuberculosis, HIV, and malaria, and yet we only have 11% of grants, coming to air quality programs. It is quite fascinating, and it shows a very big gap that countries will have to work together to ensure that as much as possible we narrow this gap. Very grateful for that presentation. I will now move ahead to invite my panelists to share their views and perspectives on the subject, and I start with Jenny. Jenny, over to you.
Thank you very much, Peter. And let me first of all congratulate the Clean Air Fund for the very informative report on the state of global air quality funding. I think that this report clearly shows, and now also it came clearly out in the presentation of Sean, that there exists an important discrepancy between the dimension and emergency of the air pollution problem and the small amount of development funding that is being allocated for tackling it. Just yesterday, actually, you might have seen it, the WHO published the new global air quality guidelines, which actually recommend lower new air quality levels to protect the health of the population, as it was found that there exists a clear evidence of the damage air pollution inflicts on human health at even lower concentration than previously understood. Switzerland has been working on air quality in its international cooperation for over 30 years. At the beginning, actually, our cooperation was very much focused on finding technical solutions for increasing energy efficiency and reducing greenhouse gas emissions in micro and small scale industry, such as, for example, the glass bangle industry in India, the brick sector, or also the transport sector, and thus contributing to improving air quality. Over the years, we got more and more involved also in supporting partner governments at national and subnational level in developing and implementing clean air action plan and establishing robust monitoring and evaluation systems. So you might ask, why do we as development agency invest in air quality? Actually, reducing air pollution is crucial for meeting the sustainable development goals. And I think we've also seen it in the previous presentation, because actually there are multiple benefits for human health, but also, and sometimes less recognized, for food security, protecting the ecosystem, reducing poverty and inequality, as well as contributing to climate change mitigation. Often we see that the topic of air pollution is left to the ministries of environment, ignoring actually the social and economic impacts of it. I do think that in order to mobilize more the development community, it is important that we can demonstrate the relevance of air pollution action for the 2030 agenda. Air quality is explicitly mentioned in 2 of the goals and contributes to many more. That's why, actually, besides our bilateral engagement at country and regional level, we do also support coalitions that raise the profile of reducing pollution on the global agenda, such as the Global Alliance on Health and Pollution and the Climate and Clean Air Coalition. As a program that is actually primarily working on climate change and environmental issues, we have learned that gaining support among decision makers and population for introducing new technologies, practices, and also regulation works best by emphasizing the multiple benefits of cleaner action. So let me illustrate this actually with 2 examples. First, integrating climate and clean air action has the potential to increase progress on both fronts simultaneously, as reducing levels of key air pollutant, some of which contribute to climate change, leads at the same time to important greenhouse gas emission reduction. It is therefore important that air pollution and climate change communities make these links. Second, air pollution is one of our biggest and most urgent global threats and an important determinant of health, given the fact that air pollution causes around 7 million premature deaths every year. As air pollution disproportionately affects people in low and middle income countries, and within these countries, the poorest communities suffer the most, supporting actually clean air action contributes to increasing the resilience of millions of people against chronic diseases, including asthma, strokes, heart attacks, dementia, but also infection diseases such as COVID-19. Experiences from our bilateral work on energy efficiency and fuel switches in micro and small enterprises, such as the bangle production in India or the brick production in South Asia, Africa, and Latin America, have clearly demonstrated this multiple benefit. The introduction of new technologies has not only contributed to reduction of CO2 emissions, but has also led to a safer working environment and increased the health of the workers. As a consequence of this, the productivity of these industries has increased as people were less ill and absent from work. Our work has also shown that in order to tackle air pollution, precisely understanding the sources of air pollution is important. That's why we do also support scientific collaboration in this field between Swiss and local research institutes in our partner countries, with the aim of creating evidence for informing the development of new policies and regulation. At the moment, we work on this together with India and China. In order to accelerate action on air pollution, we believe that it is key to share experiences among countries and actors engaged in reducing pollution. Even though all countries that have air pollution problems face different contexts, there are many common challenges that need to overcome when trying to reducing pollution in a specific sector. International cooperation can play an important role in fostering this exchange. We do this, for example, by working regionally, for example, in our program in Latin America on transport, where we bring together different countries and partners at the municipal level to share solutions on reducing pollution from the transport sector, but also by supporting actually global platform that enables this kind of knowledge exchange, like the Climate and Clean Air Coalition with its different sectoral initiatives. So I hope I was able to give you a little bit insight into the work that we are doing from the Swiss Development Agency, and I'm happy to answer some of your questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jenny, and congratulations to the Swiss Development Corporation for all that you have been doing. Of course, I can only agree with you that to be able to achieve the SDGs, we definitely have to tackle air quality issues. And we need international cooperation. We need to have the necessary linkages with other aspects of development, and that we don't have to leave air quality issues in the hands of the ministries of environment alone. Very great presentation there from Jenny. Of course, let me use the opportunity to also thank your government for the collaboration under Article 6, which will also have issues relating to air quality and clean air, in the area of cook stoves and also methane capture from landfills. So thank you very much for that collaboration. I now move to the next presenter, and I call on Liz to make her presentation. Over to you.
Well, thank you so much, Minister. And I'm so delighted to be here and so happy to see this work coming forward. I come from IKEA Foundation, and you might ask why IKEA Foundation, which works on climate, also works on clean air. Well, I'd answer you by saying that at IKEA Foundation, one of our key priorities is to ensure a transition to a cleaner, greener, and sustainable planet. And clean air is fundamental to a cleaner planet. We also believe that achieving a greener, cleaner, sustainable planet will be possible if all people are given the opportunity to participate in the transition and to benefit from it. And that ties strongly to air quality, because in one sense, air pollution does not discriminate. We all breathe. But in another sense, and as the report shows, some people are at greater risk or disadvantage to suffering the effects of poor air quality. So we need people from all walks of life to participate quite specifically to fight for the right to breathe clean air, because the benefits are meaningful and they are multiple. Clean air, from where I sit, is also an accessible entry point to climate action. And I explain it this way, like many of you, I have sat around dinner tables with family and friends who have debated climate science, or in a very human way, felt dumbfounded about what they can do in their own individual action to change global warming. And there's a helplessness and inaction or passivity that flows from those feelings. But if you were to ask a parent how they feel when they watch their child wheeze or cough, and if you were to explain that there is something they can do about it, then they're far more motivated to take action. Air pollution, as we all know, is not an accident. It is the result directly from the way we have structured our economies and our societies, which rely heavily on the use of fossil fuels as the predominant source of energy to power everything: our transportation, our heating, our cooling, our electricity, the reason I'm online with you right now. And that must change, and it can change. We cannot get everyone to care about gigatons or greenhouse gas emissions or chemicals like hydrofluorocarbons, but we can open windows, literally and metaphorically, that mobilize people around issues of personal concern. The more people raise questions in their communities or with lawmakers and look at the evidence, the faster we can address a problem that is both critical and entirely solvable. And these solutions are needed. And for clean air, the same solutions that are needed are the ones that powerfully converge with solutions that we have to roll out to limit global warming and address climate change. Philanthropy, of course, cannot do everything, and there are far too few resources to address the need at the level and scale of the problem. So it's incumbent as a funder that I think, wherever possible, about the strategic way that we can use our resource. Often I think of philanthropy's superpower as surfacing hidden knowledge. So by providing funds to groups like the Clean Air Fund and their partners to gather data to support innovation, we help everyday people and key decision makers gain a new lens into understanding these problems. One of the things that really struck me from this report were the statistics around the golden missed economic opportunities. Because for all the complaints that are offered about the cost of addressing climate change or making the transition to low carbon economies, there's an even greater cost to inaction. I think in the report it cited 3% of GDP for India is lost, and something on the level of 1.6 billion pounds in the UK. Imagine the enormous palpable dividends for economies if leaders commit to devote more attention and more resources to tackling air pollution. It is captivating to realize the strong returns on public investment and the multiple co-benefits in terms of labor productivity, human health, the quality of life, and the quality of space. So philanthropy, from my view, places the proverbial foot in the door so it will not shut. And when leaders, like the minister himself who spoke earlier about the actions he's taking, when leaders open that door further, a huge flood of light can come in. Perhaps most importantly, and I'll close with this, in my view, when philanthropy is truly effective, it's because it funds work that matches evidence and solutions with leadership that is capable of speaking to our common humanity. And this is what I find so compelling about supporting work on air quality. Air quality should not be a divisive topic. It is as important to public health as it is to protecting the planet. It does not have a political face. And if we do the right thing, every single man, woman, and child benefits from the solution. Thank you again for inviting me.
Thank you, Liz. And thank you very much for sharing your perspective from a philanthropic side. Of course, we need a science, but beyond the science, we need action on the ground, just as we've said. And of course, the cost of inaction is even more. So we all need to get on board and do something as soon as possible. Thank you very much for sharing your perspectives in there. And I will now move to the World Bank, and I'll invite Yewande to make her presentation.
You could unmute Yewande.
You are muted, so please kindly unmute.
Sorry about that. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Good day to all my colleagues participating this morning here in Washington. So the report has come at a very timely opportunity, and I hope that it is something that really stimulates the much needed action that is required, especially in low and middle income countries throughout the world, in addressing air pollution for the global problem that it is. And I'll just speak briefly to three issues. And the first one is, why is the World Bank interested? Why is this of interest to the World Bank and Development Bank, the whole issue of air pollution? And I'll just say very clearly that in order to reduce poverty and promote income growth for the poor, air pollution control is a priority for the World Bank. It is a priority. And that's why it's important that we're investing in air quality. As some of you may know, the World Bank's goals are to reduce poverty and to boost shared prosperity, which means in simple terms, promoting income growth for the bottom 40% of the population within a country. Given those goals, clearly tackling air pollution is a priority because from the 7 million people that die prematurely every year due to air pollution, most are poor and they're vulnerable, especially including children under the age of 5, the elderly, and they live in low and middle income countries. So air pollution is affecting people now. It's not in the future, it is today. The World Bank also has a priority to contribute to mitigating climate change. And clearly there are synergies between air quality management and climate change mitigation. Effectively addressing air pollution requires multi-sectoral intervention, as had been mentioned earlier. It cannot effectively be tackled by a single sector. It's not just the health sector. It's not just an environment problem. It's not just the energy sector or even the transport sector. We have to bring in multiple sectors: agriculture, trade, industry, urban development, private sector, and others in order to have effective solutions. Also, the World Bank is a unique institution in that it can provide the needed intersectorality, plus the financing, technical assistance, and knowledge sharing that are all needed to effectively address air pollution. So given that, what we need to ask ourselves, what would a good air quality programming look like from the point of view of development funders? And very clearly, what I would say is that good air quality programming is programming that achieves real change on the ground. In this case, that is air pollution. That means reducing mortality and morbidity in a significant way. And I'll break this down a little bit. To achieve outcomes on the ground, real outcomes on the ground, which is what I mentioned, there are a number of factors that affect this. You need inputs, outputs, and results. And a good program should have all these. It needs outputs, it needs inputs, it produces outputs, and it includes incentives that help to achieve results. So for example, in Mongolia, the work that we've done shows that household air pollution from heating and cooking is the main source of air pollution. And so the input was World Bank providing financing for clean heating and cooking. And this resulted in about a 65% reduction in the concentrations of fine particulate matter in Ulaanbaatar over a 10-year period. In Peru, the World Bank provided financial support through what we call a development policy lending instrument over a period of about 10 years. And the outputs from that program were policies, such as regulations that were designed, enacted, and implemented to, for example, the establishment of emission limits for vehicles and stationary sources, implementation of vehicle inspection programs, the phase out of sulfur-based fuels, and others. And the implementation of these policies contributed to the achievement of more than a 35% reduction in particulate matter in the Lima Callao metropolitan area over a 10-year period. Another example is from the Hebei province in China. The bank provided support through what is called a Program for Results lending instrument, which was supported by solid technical assistance and analytical work. And this led to the outcomes whereby there was a 40% reduction in outdoor concentrations of fine and ultrafine particles in less than a 4-year period. So for these reasons, it's very clear that these are essential elements for good programming. Lastly, one cannot underestimate the need for political willingness. It's crucial for achieving results. While the World Bank is able to support these types of programming, we do realize that a whole lot more needs to be done. The scale of the problem is huge. There are still 7 million people dying. We need to scale up our financing. We need to scale up technical assistance, knowledge sharing for improving air quality management. We cannot do this alone as the World Bank. We applaud the efforts of other development banks that are working on this, but this is the reason why the bank has now established a new program called ProClean, and ProClean aims to scale up the bank's support for improving pollution management and promoting circular economy approaches. We're looking for donors who want to partner with us and contribute to ProClean. So we very much welcome that. Lastly, one area that has been the organizers brought to my attention was the question of, is there a need for a global convention on air quality? The first thing that we need to be clear about is that air pollution is not a local issue. It is local, yes, but it is also regional and it is global. So it needs to be targeted at local, regional, and global levels. The analytical work that we've conducted in different continents has shown us that it's not even exclusively an urban problem. Therefore, regional or air-shared approaches that cross jurisdictional boundaries, physical boundaries are needed. Otherwise, the solutions are at best only partially effective. And what is being done under the United Nations Economic Commission for Europe, the Convention on Long-Range Transboundary Air Pollution, is clearly going in the right direction. There was a similar proposal that was presented at the Global Conference for Air Pollution and Health, which was organized in 2018 by the World Health Organization, the World Bank, and other partners. And there was large support for that type of proposal. So to recap, it's clear that this is a local problem, it's regional, it's global, and it needs to be targeted at local, regional, and global levels. Thank you very much for this opportunity.
Thank you, Yewande, for those interesting points that you've raised. Do we need a global treaty on air quality? Very important point there. And of course, we need political will, but yet we know the World Bank is in a unique position to do more than you are currently doing. And thank you to the World Bank. Ghana has the opportunity of benefiting under the African Health Pollution Program, which my ministry is currently implementing with the Environmental Protection Agency and the World Bank. So thank you very much. And I know you're doing similar projects across the globe. Yes, on low sulfur, Ghana has also shown some leadership. We've managed to reduce sulfur in fuels to about 10 ppm. And I think that this is a good example for the continent. So very interesting points there. And I will now want to open up for the Q&A session, but I thank all my earlier speakers for your contributions and for sharing different perspectives on the subject. And I will call on Claire to now bring on board some of the questions that you have put together, and then let's call on our discussants to respond to them. So Claire, over to you now.
Great, thank you, Peter. So we've got some of the questions that we've gathered, but first we'll kick off, and I'll give two at a time and then come back. But the first one refers to you mentioned them, Peter and Janine, the WHO announcement on the new guidelines yesterday. Quite dramatic figures on the impact on death and life expectancy and health, and unavoidable deaths by tackling air quality. And I think the question to the panel is, this obviously requires a real step change from governments, and external funders, development agencies, etc. as well. And it's what more can development agencies, banks, and other stakeholders do to really meet the challenge on this, given that it looks like we do really need to have far more ambition in that area. So that's one. And then secondly, a question from Colin McKechnie on, this is a more technical one, on the analysis around grants, where funding the primary objective of the funding isn't to tackle or improve air quality, but it's a byproduct, a benefit, that air pollution is tackled by funding something else, like Colin gives the example of the International Nitrogen Management System, which looks at fertilizer, but it positively impacted on air quality. So there too, and then we have some more if there's time after.
Okay, so I will open up. I believe that the three panelists can respond to these questions, but maybe let me start with Jenny, and then I go to World Bank, and then I can come to Liz from IKEA. So Jenny.
Yes, thank you very much for this question. I think the first one regarding how can we step up and increase ambition now and working on air pollution. I think it has been mentioned also by the colleague from the World Bank that actually we need to tackle air pollution at different levels, really from the global to the regional and the national level. And I think, therefore, international coalitions such as Climate and Clean Air Coalition are good platforms in order to have exchange among different countries, and also to a platform to also express political will in order to really tackle the issue. Within this coalition, we always have a ministerial meeting. It will meet this year also again in the framework of the COP26. And there really it's a platform where ministers from around the world come together and also exchange on their ongoing programs and also make commitments on how they address actually this issue within their respective countries. Then I think when we talk about support that we can provide, it's certainly at different levels. I have mentioned also some of them in my presentation. Or I think on the one hand, we can provide support to partner countries in developing their national policies and regulations, national plans, and especially also in the implementation of it. What we have experienced is really that it's important that we do this evidence-based, meaning really on information available on the ground, and this often then it can be quite local actually. So if you go dig into the sources of air pollution, I think it's important to know them well in order to address them accordingly. So I would say intervention at the policy planning level, but then also with regards to implementation in the field, bringing about new solutions on how to tackle air pollution in different sectors. I think many of them have been mentioned, from industry sector, agriculture sector, but also in particular the transport sector, sharing experiences that have been made, good experiences which led to important impacts, but then also providing technical assistance in order to be able to really implement. And I think there's still room actually for working on these different levels, and I think that's the way I would see how to move forward. I maybe want to try to stress a comment I made before. I think it's really important, and I think others also mentioned that sometimes it's difficult to convince people from a climate change angle to work on air pollution. So I think it's really important that we tackle it from a side where we can also really convince decision makers and also people so that they can see a direct benefit of them. And I think health is really also is in that sense an important entry point, because people are directly affected by health issues. And if we take that as our starting point, then I think we have a good ground in order to make change happening.
Thank you very much,
Peter,
Jenny.
that's from my side. Thank you, Peter.
Thank you. And let me now call on you one day. But I believe that, yes, we actually need to work on how we can convince our friends from the climate side to understand the need for air quality. So one day, over to you for your response.
Yes, thank you. So what I would like to say is this. First, from the bank's point of view, we are looking at the problem as one that affects the poorest of the poor, the most vulnerable. So that is always at the back of our minds. And I'll just use an anecdotal example from some work that we had done in other parts of the world. Actually, it was in Colombia, where we had done surveys to people, all groups of stakeholders, and asked them what they thought the priority environmental issue was. And for many people, the man on the street, the woman on the street, it was the things that affected their daily livelihoods. It was the air quality. It was not the ozone layer. It was not climate change even at that point in time. That was years ago. Perhaps the survey might show different results today. So air pollution is affecting people today. It's affecting people now. It's affecting their lives and their livelihoods. I realize and I agree that it is important to bring together, and there are indeed synergies between improving air quality management and climate change mitigation. We should not lose track of those. We should build on those synergies. And one of the ways in which we could build on those synergies is looking at areas such as short-lived climate pollutants, for example. Black carbon is one of them, that come where we know that the sources of air pollution and the sources of this kind of climate pollution are essentially the same. So if we zoom in on those type of sources, we achieve two objectives in one. We achieve the health objective, protecting, improving air quality, protecting health. We also achieve the objective of reducing climate forces and achieving climate mitigation. So I think it's important to bring those two strands of thinking together when we, in our discussions, when we discuss with our clients, when we have discussions with our counterparts. It's important that we bring those together. The second thing is very solid analytical work needs to be done to inform even the type of interventions that need to be used to control air pollution. Thankfully, there's a lot of technology, there are a lot of abatement methods that are known today, but all of these need to be selected, or the decision making around their selection needs to be informed by very solid analytical work that looks, for example, what are the benefits, what are the costs of alternative interventions. So intervention that may work in Freetown, Sierra Leone may not be the same one that may work in Hanoi, Vietnam. We have to bring it to the specific context and say, what are the benefits and the cost of the alternative interventions? And it's also important that we continue to support our clients through technical assistance, and sometimes that has to be through grants. And I dare say, actually, in a lot of cases, has to be through grants. And that is an area where we're hoping that we ourselves as the World Bank, as I mentioned earlier, we have the ProClean program that it's a relatively new program, but I'm also hoping that our colleagues in philanthropies and other development partners can also join together to provide this kind of grant funding that definitely many of our clients, the countries in which we work, need. So that is what I would say on that. Thank you.
Thank you very much once again, and let's dwell on the synergies. And thank you for emphasizing the nexus between air quality and poverty once again. Of course, the cost-benefit analysis has to be done. And I'll call on Liz to share your perspective.
Well, the perspectives, of course, are multiple. I think what our previous panelists have said are quite relevant. But I think one of the things that I would emphasize is that, and this is in reaction to what our colleague from the World Bank just said, I do know that and understand that there are localized solutions, but I think there are ways that we have to begin to recognize some of the really general principles that will work everywhere and that we really must double down on. And these come down to the centrality of us working away from fossil fuels and making commitments to take the bold steps towards low transition, low carbon economies. These are the predominant factors affecting air quality, and we have no time left. So while we are looking at localized solutions, let's also convene around the most important things, and where our multilateral donor colleagues need to also be super champions for all of us, because they are dealing at the level of governments and with ministries all the times. The recommendations that they make on energy sources matter. They matter more now than ever before. So we can all join hands and agree on so many things and recognize where particular solutions must be localized, but we have to also stay very, very strong on the North Star that is at the heart of this issue.
Thank you very much, Liz. We need to both think and act globally and locally, and not only to think globally and act locally. Thank you very much for that. That's a good insight there. So let me go back to Claire if there are any further questions that my discussants will have to respond to.
Yeah, well, I think that there was the question from Colin, which I think Sean can probably answer. And then we might be at the stage of you doing final wrap up, Peter. And I think that we can probably either ask for questions directed at panelists, respond to people who have asked questions that won't get answered, or CAF will, Clean Air Fund will supply answers ourselves. So if Sean answers Colin's question and then you wrap up, Peter, that would be great, I think.
Okay, so Sean, over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Peter, and thank you, Claire. Yeah, and Colin, it's a great question. Yes, if you get a chance to look at the report, you will see that our analysis of granting and lending covers both primary projects, or projects for which air quality improvements are a direct benefit, and secondary projects where air quality improvements are a byproduct, a happy byproduct. Unfortunately, and the report covers this, the way projects are coded and recorded and reported into official donor databases is not very robust around air quality. So while we took a consistent approach using a keyword search, and we described the methodology in the report, it may be that there are some projects, and we need to go back and check and see whether this nitrogen project in particular was captured. There may be some projects that have some air quality benefits that won't necessarily yet be captured in the numbers. And every year this report will improve the methodology, and we want to improve the coding or campaign to improve the coding and the reporting. So we really do capture what is actually happening and what synergies are taking place. So feel free on LinkedIn to flag your report to us, and we will check that one and see whether that one's in the database. And if it's not, we will add it. Thank you, Colin.
So feel free to post your questions, and definitely you would receive responses from the Clean Air Fund Secretariat. Thank you very much once again, my panelists, and also Sean for the presentation, and everyone for your contributions. Definitely we need more time to discuss this subject, and this subject cannot be discussed as an event. It must be discussed now and always. Of course, we all have agreed that there's a funding gap, and there's a need for us to work together globally and also act locally. Certainly, we encourage our development finance institutions to step up their game in terms of supporting countries to do more in the area of air quality. And finally, I want to thank the Clean Air Fund Secretariat for organizing this very interactive and very important discussion this afternoon. And I hope that we'll have opportunity to discuss this again. I thank everyone very much, and I would want to draw the curtains at this point. Thank you everyone, and good afternoon, good evening, good morning, depending on where you are. See you again very soon, and good day.
Okay, I have stopped that live stream. I'm sorry we didn't have time for the closing remarks, team, but thank you so much for all of your inputs. That